This week is Parshat Belotcha, which means when you kindle, referring to Aaron kindling the special menorah that's inside the Mishkan. And I'm going to talk about the Parsha tomorrow, but I thought since it's such a serious Parsha with so many things starting to go wrong, and in fact, we're in for a few weeks in a row of things going wrong, which makes for wonderful drama and interesting stories, but is also psychically disappointing and also very frustrating. I find I read the same stories every year and wonder, why couldn't we do something differently this time? But the fact that we don't means that these are lessons that we have to learn over and over again so that we don't forget. So I'm going to leave the serious stuff for tomorrow. I just wanted to share something fun with you guys tonight that also comes from our Parsha. And it is a midrash that's based on one slim verse in the Parsha. It's at the end of the Parsha. And it has to do with the story of Aaron and Midiam speaking against Moshe. And there's devastating consequences that go with that. So first of all, and this is a review for most of you, midrash is related to the Hebrew word lidrosh, which means to inquire or to seek out. And typically what a midrash does is it fills in the gaps that the text presents, answers some of the questions that are not explicitly answered in the text. And since we know that Torah is laconic, very sparse with words, there's hundreds and hundreds of midrashim about just about every verse in the Torah, trying to explain or fill in or really fantasize about what goes along with the very sparse words that we're reading. So I'm just going to read to you the one verse that this midrash is based on. And it's, if you've got a Tanakh and you want to take a look at it, it's chapter 12, verse 1. And it says, Moshe and Aaron spoke, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moshe regarding the Cushite woman he married. So that's the underlying text. And that raises a lot of questions. For example, our sages ask, well, who is this Cushite woman that he married? We thought he married Zipporah, who was Yitro's daughter and was Midian, not Cushite. So there's a whole lot of questions about who is this woman, and there's lots of different midrashim, but I picked out and kind of combined two of them to explain what happened here. So first of all, a little backstory. We know that Moshe left Egypt as a young man. Some accounts say that he was only 18. This was right after he had the encounter with the Egyptian taskmaster, saw the Egyptian taskmaster beating up a Hebrew slave, and he killed the taskmaster. And then Pharaoh found out about it, wanted to kill Moshe, so Moshe fled from Egypt. And then the next verse we're told, and he was at Midian. So it seems like the two events happened pretty near in history, at least whatever chronology we can piece together. But the truth is that they don't happen close in time at all. So as I said, Moshe was about 18 when he left Egypt. And there's about a 60-year gap between when he leaves Egypt and when he goes out shepherding Yitro's sheep, and he's called to by God, because we know that Moshe is 80 years old at that time. So there's a roughly 60-year gap here. What happened during that time? And this is where the midrash gets fanciful and eager to fill in. So let me tell you a fun story about Moshe to fill in this gap of almost 60 years. When he left Egypt, he went by way of Cush, which is what we would call modern Ethiopia now. And about that time, there was a war that broke out between Cush, Ethiopia, and some of the vassal states that Cush had lorded over for quite some time. They were rebelling against the Cushite king, and they were fighting for their independence. The king of Cush was known as Kinkos. So he prepared for war, and he left a man named Bilam in charge of the government while he went out to war. Now, this is, the Midrash tells us, this is the same Bilam that we're going to meet up with in Parshat Balak, who was a non-Jewish prophet who was hired by King Balak to curse the Jews. But as we know, he said, I can only do what God lets me do, and he ended up blessing the Jews. And in fact, one of the beautiful blessings is where we get the beautiful prayer, Ma Tovu, how goodly are your tents. In any event, this is the same Bilam who was left in charge when the Cushite king went out to war. So he's outside of Cush. He is at war with these rebellious vassal states, and he successfully defeated them. So meanwhile, Bilam was enjoying the fact that he was in this influential position and the acting ruler of Cush. So he gathered some leaders around him, people who were on his side, and said, the city is now in our hands. We can get rid of Kinkos as king. Let's unite. And when he comes back, let's not let him back into the city. To build a wall that surrounds the entire city, and then around the wall, they're going to have a moat. And he suggested that they fill the moat with all kinds of venomous snakes and scorpions. So they do this, and then Kinkos, the king, returns from the war, but can't get into into Cush. All the gates were closed to him. He cannot get through the moat because of the poisonous snakes and the poisonous scorpions. He can't climb over the wall because he can't get through the moat. So he's trying to do this and lay siege to the city, but the city is fortified with this moat and with the wall, and everything he tries to do gets repelled. So it's about this time that Moshe leaves Egypt and goes towards Midian by way of Ethiopia. And this is the first year of the siege. So he's a strong young man. He's about 20 years old. He comes to Cush and he decides to join the forces of Kinkos, the king. So he becomes very popular with the troops. He's strong. He's a born leader. He's a good military person. And they're very impressed by how much he knows and what strategy he's able to figure out. And also that he seems to have a royal bearing, which makes sense because Moshe was raised as a prince in the palace of Egypt. So he found himself teaching the troops all the Egyptian battle tactics, and that further gains him their respect and admiration. So the king notices this and takes him, meaning Moshe, to be his closest advisor, his number 2. So the siege continues for about 9 years, and then Kinkos dies, the king of Cush dies. So right after he was buried, his officers meet again, and they wonder, who are we going to appoint as the new king? Because the king's son is too young to act as a king, not old enough to rule. So they decide unanimously that they're going to appoint Moshe to this position. So they said, long live the king, long live King Moshe. And Moshe at that time was about 27 years old. So the troops approach Moshe again and say, look, for 9 years, we've been kept out of our own city. We haven't been able to cross the moat, scale the wall, and take back the city. And Moshe says, I have a plan. But you have to obey my orders without question, and I will reveal my plan to you. You must all promise that you will follow every step exactly. So we see that it reads kind of like a fairy tale here. And they all reply back, we will do exactly as you say. So Moshe says, here's my instructions. Go to the forest and look for storks' nests, storks, the birds. Take the baby storks and distribute them among you until each man has his own bird. And then that man needs to raise that bird from birth and get the bird to trust him and obey him. So they were all wondering, where's this going and how is this going to help anything? But they were obedient. They had promised. So they go into the forest and they see a tremendous flock of storks, and they trained the storks to obey their commands. Then Moshe assembled them again after the storks were grown up and the obedience training was finished. And he tells them, get ready for battle, prepare to attack. But most important, do not give the storks any food for 3 days. So on the third day, Moshe led the troops to the side of the city where the trench, the moat, was full of snakes and scorpions. And he told the men, send your stork, ordering it to attack the snakes and scorpions. So the hungry storks took no time to kill and eat all the serpents, all the scorpions. With their long beaks, they could attack the snakes with no fear of them being bitten themselves. So after this encounter, not a single snake remained, not a single scorpion. With that, they were able to cross the moat, and then there was no problem with them scaling the walls of the city. 1,100 of Balaam's men were captured and executed, but Balaam escaped, and we're going to meet him in a few weeks, actually. And he went to Egypt, where he became one of Pharaoh's chief advisors. And there's another really interesting midrash that has to do with the advice that Balaam gave to Pharaoh. I'll save that for another time. So Moshe was then crowned king of Cush, and he was also given the deceased king's young widow as a wife. However, she was a descendant of Canaan, and it was prohibited for Israelites to marry a descendant of Canaan. That goes back to the days of Noah and his sons. So he was never intimate with her. So Moshe never had sex with this deceased king's widow. But he remained there for 40 years. And during this time, there was great prosperity in Ethiopia, but the queen was unhappy. She went to her council and said, what you've done to me is terrible. I'm the queen, but the king never even touches me. He does not believe in our gods. A king should have the same religion as his subjects. And now my son is old enough to be king. I want my son to be king. So the council heard her plea. They agreed with her arguments, and then they voted to crown Kinko's son as the king. But they were very grateful to Moshe. They approached him and explained the situation, and he agreed to step down peaceably. It was a warm parting. They gave him many gifts, sent him off with great honor, befitting a former king. So Moshe left Cush and then went towards Midiam. So that is the midrash about what happened. And it is a wonderful, fanciful midrash, and it gives you a taste of just how midrash likes to employ every kind of imaginative thought while still having some kind of thread to the original text. That is my little teaching for tonight. Tomorrow's teaching won't be as fun.